They say history remembers greatness, but sometimes greatness is buried. Prince McJunkins should have been a household name. He was the kind of quarterback coaches dreamed about and defenses feared. A dual threat phenom who shattered records, silenced stadiums, and rewrote what a quarterback could be. He was explosive, he was electric, he was unstoppable, and for a moment, the football world had no choice but to bow to his brilliance. But then, almost overnight, his story disappeared. No documentaries, no national tributes, no celebration of the history he made. Just silence, as if someone decided his legacy didn't deserve to exist. As if a black quarterback redefining the position was too uncomfortable for the system built to control the narrative. As if college football needed him erased to protect the old guard who refused to accept a new kind of greatness. How does one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in college football history vanish from the record books? How does a player who changed everything become a name almost no one remembers? And who decided the world would forget Prince McJunkins? The truth behind that erasure begins now. Prince McJunkins didn't grow up playing football. He grew up fighting for a space in a world determined to limit black quarterbacks before they ever touched a field. In an era when coaches still whispered the same tired myths about black athletes, not smart enough, not disciplined enough, better suited at receiver or defensive back, McJunkins refused to accept the role that the system tried to assign him. From his earliest days in Wichita, Kansas, he wasn't just competing against opponents, he was competing against history. Every time he picked up a football, he proved he wasn't simply an athlete, he was a strategist, a thinker, a leader, the kind of quarterback they swore black men couldn't be. He dominated high school competition, dismantling defenses with both his arms and legs, turning Friday night lights into a stage where prejudice had no choice but to kneel. College recruiters noticed, yet many still looked the other way. They wanted his talent, but not the responsibility of letting a black quarterback lead. Some told him he'd never start under center. Others suggested position changes before they ever watched him throw. But McJunkins held firm. He knew his worth and he knew the truth. In Wichita State, one of the few programs willing to hand him the ball, soon learned what the nation would try to forget. Because the moment he stepped onto the field, something undeniable happened. The stadium didn't just watch him, they rose for him. Defenses didn't just prepare for him, they panicked. And every snap he took proved the establishment wrong. Yet, instead of celebrating his rise, powerful forces began to circle, forces terrified of where his success might lead. Because if Prince McJunkins became undeniable, then the lie they repeated for decades would collapse. And that was something college football couldn't afford. The breakthrough was coming, and they knew it. The moment Prince McJunkins took full control of Wichita State's offense, everything changed. He didn't simply run plays, he rewrote what the position could be. In a college football world terrified of black quarterbacks leading from the pocket, McJunkins turned every Saturday into a courtroom, and the evidence was overwhelming. He was a weapon college football had never seen. A quarterback who could scorch defenses with precision passing 1 minute and explode past entire secondaries the next. He wasn't improvising, he was orchestrating. Every decision was calculated, every movement intentional. Every touchdown a direct assault on the lie that black men couldn't read defenses, couldn't command huddles, couldn't own a field built to exclude them. And the numbers, they were undeniable. McJunkins racked up over 4,000 passing yards and more than 2,000 yards rushing during his career, an unheard of level of production for a college quarterback in that era. He shattered records like they were bones, leaving defensive coordinators speechless and sports writers scrambling for new vocabulary just to describe him. He didn't just win games, he controlled them. He didn't just lead, he dominated. And then came the moment no one could spin, ignore, or deny. Prince McJunkins became the first black quarterback in history to win the Division IAA National Player of the Year award, the equivalent of the Heisman at his level. He was a pioneer standing on the brink of something bigger than football, something cultural, something revolutionary. For the first time, the country had to ask the question they spent decades avoiding. What happens when a black quarterback becomes undeniably the best player in college football? The answer should have been national fame. The answer should have been NFL headlines. The answer should have been a future written in gold. But instead, just when the world was finally forced to acknowledge his greatness, something happened that no one could have predicted. Something that ripped everything away in a single, devastating sweep. Something that looked a lot less like coincidence and a lot more like a system protecting itself. Because right at the height of Prince McJunkins' rise, college football erased him, and the way it happened still feels unbelievable. What happened next would destroy a program, crush a career, and rewrite history without ever asking permission. At the exact moment Prince McJunkins stood on the edge of immortality, the ground collapsed beneath him. Not because of injury, not because of scandal, not because of failure, but because of something far more calculated, something planned, something that felt like a message. In 1986, barely a heartbeat after McJunkins rewrote college football history, Wichita State abruptly shut down its football program. Overnight, no warning, no rebuilding plan, no attempt to recover. Just a sudden execution that stunned players, coaches, and an entire community. A program that survived tragedy, adversity, and decades of competition was erased as if it never mattered. And yet, somehow, the timing was a little too perfect. Right when a black quarterback proved he could dominate at the highest level, right when college football was being forced to confront the truth it had spent generations denying, right when the narrative was shifting in a direction the power structure feared, everything disappeared. There were excuses, talk of budgets, financial strain, academic priorities, but insiders knew better. Booster pressure, administrative discomfort, whispers that success built around a black quarterback was bad for business. They could celebrate black talent, but not black leadership. They could allow black athletes to win games, but not reshape the system. And Prince McJunkins was about to reshape everything. The university didn't just cut a football program, they destroyed his platform. They suffocated his momentum. They severed his path to national recognition and NFL visibility. One day he was a legend in motion, the next day he was stranded, abandoned by a system that refused to let a black quarterback stand at the center of the sport. And here's the part that stings decades later. When Wichita State closed its doors, they didn't just shut down a team, they shut down the future of black quarterbacks in that space. They erased film, they erased opportunity, they erased history. McJunkins wasn't just facing opponents anymore, he was fighting erasure itself. An erasure powerful enough to rewrite the narrative before the world ever had a chance to hear it. But even after college football tried to silence him, Prince McJunkins refused to disappear. He chased the dream anyway, into professional football, into unfamiliar leagues, onto unfamiliar turf, fighting for the career he earned. And that's where his story turns from painful to tragic, because what happened next revealed just how determined the system was to keep him out. When Prince McJunkins left Wichita State, he carried the weight of a legacy that should have launched him into the NFL spotlight. He wasn't just another quarterback hoping for a chance. He was a proven star who had already done what the establishment said was impossible. His resume was stronger than many of the white quarterbacks who were handed opportunities without hesitation, without scrutiny, without earning half of what he had accomplished. But when McJunkins reached the threshold of the NFL, the doors that should have swung open slammed shut. Scouts who once praised his brilliance suddenly changed their tune. Executives who marveled at his leadership suddenly questioned his decision making. Analysts who glorified his athleticism suddenly used it as a weapon against him. The same blueprint they used against every black quarterback before him unfolded with cold precision. Too raw, not polished enough, doesn't fit the system, better suited for another position. It didn't matter that he was a proven champion, it didn't matter that he had already broken barriers, it didn't matter that he had the talent to reshape the league. What mattered was protecting the myth that white quarterbacks belonged in control and black quarterbacks belonged anywhere but under center. So instead of the NFL, McJunkins was pushed into the shadows of professional football, the CFL, and later the Arena League, sports graveyards for black quarterbacks the NFL didn't want the world to see. There, he fought with everything he had left. He still flashed brilliance, he still electrified crowds, he still proved he was a leader. But every year he spent outside the NFL machinery, the narrative shifted. The media stopped saying he was overlooked. They started saying he was unproven, then forgotten, then irrelevant. And the system quietly won. No combine spotlight, no national broadcast, no draft moment, just silence, engineered to erase everything he had built. By the time the country finally asked whatever happened to Prince McJunkins, the machine had already buried him beneath decades of rewritten history. And here's the part that haunts the story. While less talented white quarterbacks with half his skill walked into comfortable NFL careers, Prince McJunkins, the man who proved the future, was left to fight alone. But even after his playing career faded, his fight wasn't over. Because legacy isn't measured by how bright the lights shine, it's measured by how many people they try to turn them off for. And the impact Prince McJunkins made, quietly, invisibly, defiantly, still lives today. Even though the world tried to erase Prince McJunkins, his legacy refused to die. Because what he accomplished, what he became, changed football forever, whether the system ever admitted it or not. Long before the nation celebrated dual threat quarterbacks like Michael Vick, Steve McNair, Donovan McNabb, or Lamar Jackson, long before ESPN glorified the evolution of the position, long before the NFL pretended to embrace black quarterbacks as leaders rather than athletes, Prince McJunkins had already proven the blueprint. He showed the world that a quarterback could control the field with both brilliance and athleticism. He showed that intelligence, leadership, poise, and innovation didn't belong to one race. He showed that the future of football would look nothing like the past. And that is exactly why they tried to erase him. Because if the world had been allowed to witness the full power of his greatness, if the program around him had elevated rather than eliminated him, if the NFL had embraced rather than rejected him, the story of black quarterbacks in America might have accelerated decades sooner. Instead, his silence protected the old guard. His disappearance protected the lie. His absence allowed for the institutions of college football and the NFL to pretend change came from their generosity, not from their fear of being exposed. But here's the part no one can rewrite. Players talk, coaches remember, communities never forget the ones who carried them. Ask the generation of black quarterbacks who rose after him. Ask the players who watched Wichita State collapse and wondered if their dreams could survive too. Ask every young athlete today who refuses to change positions, refuses to accept limits, refuses to bow to a system designed to keep them in the shadows. Many of them will tell you the same truth. Prince McJunkins walked so they could run. And even though his name was stripped from the headlines, his influence lived on in the DNA of the sport. Every time a black quarterback breaks a record, his legacy echoes. Every time a black quarterback becomes the face of a franchise, his fight continues. Every time a black quarterback proves he belongs, the lie loses power. But one question still remains. The question college football has spent nearly 40 years avoiding. How does someone who changed everything disappear from history? The answer is the most painful part of this story. The truth is this: Prince McJunkins wasn't forgotten by accident. He was removed. He was erased by a system terrified of what he represented. A black quarterback who didn't just break rules, but rewrote the entire rule book. College football wasn't ready for a world where black quarterbacks didn't just exist, they excelled. They weren't ready for a narrative where athleticism and intelligence lived in the same body. They weren't ready to admit that the myth they built their sport upon, that white quarterbacks were natural leaders and black quarterbacks were natural followers, was collapsing in real time. So they did what institutions have always done when faced with the truth that threatens their power. They buried it, they buried him, they buried the living evidence that proved they were wrong. They erased his film, they erased his platform, they erased his path to the NFL. They erased his narrative until all that remained was a name without a story. And once they erased him, they replaced him with a timeline that worked for them. A timeline that pretended progress was born from their generosity, not from the brilliance of men like McJunkins who forced their hand. A timeline that conveniently skipped that one player who proved the future years before the world was allowed to see it. History didn't forget Prince McJunkins. History was instructed not to remember him. And that silence, decades of silence, became the loudest injustice of all. Because while the sport evolved and the world celebrated the rise of black quarterbacks who followed, one name was missing from every documentary, every panel discussion, every Hall of Fame argument. The man who proved it first, the man who showed them what was possible, the man they erased from college football history. But today, right now, that silence ends because nothing stays buried forever. Not truth, not legacy, not Prince McJunkins. And if the world had known his full story, if the system had not suffocated his future, if they had not closed the doors he fought to open, how different would football look today? This is more than a football story. This is a story about power, race, and the cost of threatening the status quo. It's a story about how history is not always written by the winners, but by those who control the pen. And Prince McJunkins paid the price for telling a truth the establishment refused to hear. He should have been an NFL star. He should have been a national icon. He should have stood alongside the legends whose names echo across stadiums. But instead, he became something even more dangerous, proof that greatness doesn't need permission. And now, the silence they built around him is cracked. Now, the story they buried has resurfaced. Now, the legacy they tried to erase is rising again, because history belongs to those brave enough to reclaim it. And today, we reclaim Prince McJunkins. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, if you believe forgotten legends deserve their names restored, if you believe the truth deserves daylight, then help us make sure he is never erased again. Like, comment, subscribe, and join us next week as we continue the mission of restoring the legends history tried to bury.